What's going on, guys? I am here with Elliot Designs and Justin's not here, is he? No.
Unfortunately not.
This was very last minute for Justin to bow out. Justin decided at the very last minute that he could not make it, and unfortunately, he's not feeling good. So, for all you guys, think about Justin. We are going to do this one in our honor and his memory. And he actually said if this was his last day on Earth, he wanted to make sure that we went through with this broadcast today. I don't know why you're laughing. That was a true statement.
I'm sorry. Don't mean to be disrespectful.
No, it's really exciting too because we brought Elliot Designs back on the show today because Elliot is a DSP guru. If you guys are not familiar, he actually has a new channel URL. What's the channel URL now?
Oh, it's actually a bit long because just Elliot Designs was taken. I would have to bring it up. I was not prepared for this. I was not prepared for you asking this.
I didn't. But he does have a new channel URL as well for his YouTube. It is Elliot Designs. He does a lot of DSP, does some stuff on transmission lines too, which is really cool. If you've been interested in transmission lines, he has a great video on that. But really cool stuff. And so today we're going to be talking all about DSP. If you guys have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about the different things about DSP. And is it 1:32 a.m. where you live?
It is, yes. Well, technically 1:31 right now, but yeah, pretty close.
Wow. Elliot is dedicated. You guys better subscribe to his channel after that. Jeez, 1:30. Now, Justin is sick, man. Justin is sick. He said, I'm out today. I'm sick. So we will do it. Oh, look at that. Blake Brockhoff said, hey, it's going to be a great show for me. I'm getting ready to finish making a 3-way active speaker.
Nice.
So let's start off
there. The active route, yeah.
I do too. So because there is active and passive. We're not going to be talking about which one's better, which one's worse, or anything like that. We're just going to be talking about DSP in general today. So DSP. I think a lot of people get scared to do DSP because there are so many options.
So many. Yep.
And you have programs like Arylic and programs like Mini DSP, which I think make it a little easier for you to get into it because they kind of show you what's going on as you're DSPing it. And then you have programs like the new Dayton Audio board that uses Sigma Studios, and that one is
Studio. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
they
little
have their
bit more
app
intense.
as well. So there are boards that support their app, which is a bit easier. But yeah, the ones with Mini DSP and such, they use flowcharts, really, flow type programming. So that definitely does make things easier for most people.
So let's just assume Blake doesn't know anything about DSP at all, and he wants to get started. What are some of the things that you would say, all right, these are some of the instances in DSP that you should look out for? These are the ones maybe you should start with when you're starting out with DSP.
Totally. Shall we start off with the two main categories, hardware and software?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Essentially, you've got main two types of DSP. You've got your dedicated type hardware DSP, where you've got a chip that's designed for doing the processing and everything. And then you've got software DSP, where you've got a big beefy processor, something that you might find in your laptop, in your phone, in your computer. And that does the processing on the software side. And for software side processing, you typically have a larger delay, but you're also capable of doing more things. You've got programs like Equalizer APO, Piece Equalizer, all of these different equalizers you can download and use and stuff like that. But you've got delay from that.
Let me just mention this too. One of the best active speakers I've ever heard was this little tiny guy. It's like about this big, real small. And it's by a friend of mine who goes to Midwest Audio Fest. Anyone that's been to Midwest Audio Fest has seen this. It's by Brian Zing, and he brings this thing all the time, and he does all software DSP, and it has just a small little wave core. I think it's like a 4-inch wave core woofer. If it's small, and that thing produces bass and stuff you listen to that thing, and it sounds 10 times larger than it is. It's amazing.
If you've got the sensitivity there, or the power handling there, you can flatten that thing out until you've got just the shape that you want. You just lose a bit of sensitivity as you do it. Because really, if you're already peaked at your amplifier, so the volume that's going straight into your amplifier, it's just below distortion. You can't pump any more voltage through that line level that's going into the amplifier.
That's a good point. Yeah.
What you do with your DSP is you don't make boosts. You just make cuts where you don't want it. So say you want to peak around 50 hertz, you just drop everything around that 50 hertz instead of.
And that's a great point, because I think a lot of people, especially when they're equalizing, like say a subwoofer in a room, they want to boost the signals that are down. And typically what you want to do instead is cut the signals that are high.
Yes.
And we'll be talking more about like what you would implement and things of that nature. But SJC does have a question for you. He says, "Hey Elliot, do you like Reese's Pieces or M&Ms?" And I don't know if that's an English thing or something, but
I've never had a Reese's Pieces. Sorry to disappoint. I can't.
What?
I can't comment on that because I've never actually tried a Reese's Pieces.
Do you not like peanut? Are you allergic to peanut butter?
No, I'm not allergic to peanut butter. Just never got around to trying one, really.
You have them in England?
Oh, we do, but they're not very common. They're not that common.
Dude, I used to live near Hershey, Pennsylvania, and if you had said you'd never had a Reese's Pieces, you probably would have got beaten up in the alley. Now, actually, we actually had a lot of Amish there, so they probably wouldn't have beat you up, but that would not have been a good thing. So
I promise I'll try one.
As Blake says, "Hey, as far as bass goes, anything can be solved with enough power and some EQ."
Well, if you were to try and boost below the port tuning, that would definitely not go down well. So, agree to disagree with that one.
Blake also has banned you from the podcast. He said Reese's for the win. Sorry. Now you have to. After the show, you're going to have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, just don't tell anyone.
I don't know. Yeah. I probably like it. It's chocolate.
So what I'm hearing is and peanut butter. So what I'm hearing is we need to send him some Reese's. I think that's true. Have you seen the movie E.T.?
Yeah.
E.T. Yeah. Well, Reese's Pieces are from that. Okay. So, all right, let's talk about some of the software, some of the things you can do in the software. So, for example, if we're building a two-way speaker, some of the things that I think that you need to be aware of right off the bat are, of course, a low pass and high pass, right? That's basically your crossover. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And the other thing that I really think you should be made aware of, which I think a lot of people don't, is your delay. Adding a delay. So I want to talk about adding a delay first. When you're building a two-way speaker, a lot of people don't think about this, and I don't have any props near me. Oh, I have one prop, and I'll have something else that I can use as a prop. You have a woofer, right, like this, and then you have a tweeter, which this is not a tweeter, and your tweeter sits in front of even though they're at the same spot, the motor of the tweeter sits behind the woofer. And so what we talk about a lot in speaker building, passive crossover, is we talk about the Z offset. And what that's designed to do is to create a delay or figure out what the delay is between the tweeter and the woofer. Because what's going to happen is if you have those speakers right here and here, and they're lined up on the baffle the same distance, your tweeter sound is going to leave earlier than your woofer sound. So we have to create a delay. Now, there's a couple ways that we can determine the delay. One is what we just talked about, the Z offset. But a lot of times with a measurement microphone, we can also use it by checking out the impulse response, right, Elliot?
Yes, totally. So, for example, inside of REW, you might, if you place the microphone between the tweeter and the woofer, kind of where your ear level will be in comparison to where the microphone will be to line it up. Take a measurement that has a time that's, it's the acoustic, I forget what it's called now, sorry.
The acoustic offset.
It's got an acoustic reference. So you've got a reference, timing references inside REW when taking measurements. So if you take a measurement of the woofer in reference to the tweeter, and then take a measurement of the tweeter in reference to the tweeter, you'll be able to find on the impulse response image the time difference between when those two peaks occurred, and that will be your millisecond offset.
And if you can't figure out how to do that in Root, the other thing that you can do is just continue to change your delay until those two impulses line up.
Yes, exactly. And you'll see that from the frequency response being smooth at the crossover point. Once you've got those filters applied, the high pass and the low pass, you'll find that they will align more smoothly.
And that's one of the cool things I think about doing an active design is being able to add that delay to those. And obviously with a three-way, you're going to have to add two delays, right? And people, so you would add a delay to the tweeter and the mid woofer to line up with your woofer when all the sound is coming out at the same time. And those delays will obviously be different for the mid woofer as it will be for the tweeter.
Totally. And you work with those delays based off of their crossover point as well, because a delay for one frequency to be lined up is different for another frequency to be lined up. Because if you it can get a little complicated, but your speed of sound is constant, of course. So you've got that. And then you've got your distance that you want to compensate for. So the way you'd actually, if you wanted to calculate the physical offset, is you'd take your distance that you've got and you'd divide it by you've got your speed of sound and you divide it by that distance, that physical acoustic offset, and you actually end up with your the frequency it corresponds to, which is quite interesting. And the funny thing about frequency is, of course, it will end up changing that offset as you go across. Yeah.
So AJC said delay for time alignment is so important. And you guys, by the way, if you don't know this, AJC and Elliott Designs are on the forum, and they both talk DSP like all the time, both of them. And I got to tell you, they know a ton. In fact, if I would have known Justin wasn't on here, I would have asked AJC if he wanted to get on as well, because they are both full of so much knowledge and talking about, and it's just really awesome to hear. Now, Blake does want to know what headphones you have.
I did see that. They're Sennheiser 4.5 BTNCs. I think they're Bluetooth noise cancelling headphones. Had them for many years now. Really good. I've just replaced the ear cushions on them a couple of times.
Blake didn't ask me about mine. Thanks a lot, Blake. Now, I actually have the new Edifier ones, the stack. They're new Edifier stacks. These are planar headphones. Love them.
Ooh. Yeah. Mine aren't that great from a hi-fi standpoint. Bass is emphasized quite a bit. Highs don't reach up too far.
Interestingly enough, I just talked about that in my review, because the bass is not amplified too much, and I like that.
No, yeah.
But a lot of headphones, I feel like that's the thing. They just want to amplify that bass, and it ends up muddying everything. I'm like,
totally.
I'm not a fan. All right, so Robert Clark said, "Hey, you don't need a mic; you can hear it." And I disagree with that. I mean, if you want, I'm not going to say I disagree. I mean, I'm sure you can hear some of it, but I would much rather have a microphone to make sure that I'm in, especially off axis as well. And I think for a car, that delay is really important. Like if you're doing car audio, especially, because that delay is going to be. I mean, no one knows where your tweeter or midwoofer is going to be. They're all over. It could be in your door panel. One could be up by your windshield. I mean, they have so many different panels.
Plus, if you adjust by hearing, something might sound good in that position, and it might end up happen that, okay, you've actually got an ideal response in that precise position that you're just in now. But then if you move off axis, or if you move to another position, then that setup is going to be completely restarted. The reason you take measurements like those directly from the drivers is so that you can fix it right at the source, because if you fix it right at the source, then you're going to have the best experience overall within the whole listening area.
It's a great point. So when you're taking your measurements for the DSP, take it from where you're going to be listening at it at. And I think that is a benefit of DSP speakers as well in general, is like if you're
not for the active design. We don't want to do it for the active design because you want to do that up close for the time response. I just wanted to, but for room correction, you want it.
I'm talking about correcting for the room at your listening position, which is a really great thing you can do with actives. You can design it directly around the room. Is my point. What I was trying to get at.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. That's all.
No, I think that's a great clarification. So Philip Talbert, Philip is. I want to get to this question because I think there's a really good point. At some point, so this is that point. So we can skip that part. Can you discuss layered crossovers in DSP and its effects, such as like a Linkage-Riley 4, BW2, or something with a longer initial slope plus a sharper slope used at the same time? What other considerations?
So different filters have different ideal properties. So I'm pretty sure it's Butterworth, which is that BW. They have more ideal phase relationships, but it doesn't cross over perfectly flat. I believe you end up with a bit of a dip.
So real quick before we go too far, he's asking about layered crossover. So I think what he's saying is
combining the two,
combining it, and then combining another one, which I'm assuming would be at a different frequency. A little bit. So like you said, like a longer initial slope. So maybe doing the BW2 originally and then an LR4 later to protect the tweeter. Like, so let's just assume a tweeter. So maybe he's starting to cross over at 3,500 and then at 1,500 hertz, he no longer wants anything really in it. So he then puts a fourth order at 1,500 hertz.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's why I was starting to explain them individually, because what you're doing when you're putting them together is you're quite literally summing up what they're doing. So you've got that Butterworth filter, and then you've got your sharp Linkage-Riley filter lower down, Linkage-Riley summing flat, but having more of a phase difference around that crossover. And essentially what you'd end up is the same at the same frequency point. Essentially what you'd end up with is, because the Linkage-Riley would sum to be flat, you'd just end up with the response that you'd usually get with a Butterworth. Of course, if you don't mind the response you get with a Butterworth and you're doing that to that shallow slope to protect your tweeter a bit as well as the Linkage-Riley, then that's great if you're okay with that bit of a dip. With the Linkage-Riley steep slope, you have, because it's Linkage-Riley 4, meaning it's fourth order, orders go up in 6 decibels per octave. So first order 6 dB per octave, second order 12. So this would be 24 dB per octave. You would end up with a really sharp slope, but at the sharpest point in the slope, you'd also have 360 degrees of phase shift, because for each order of increase you've got with minimum phase filters, which are these that you're talking about here, you have an extra 90 degrees of phase shift. So it goes 90, 180, 270, 360. So you've got, and that's a lot of phase shift. You're going to get a bit of time smearing in there. So that's why people don't typically go too high of a crossover slope, even in active. You end up with sorry if the word slipped my mind.
You said time smear earlier, so we're talking about.
Yeah. You do end up with time smearing, which is a time-based discrepancy. So even though it's not frequency-based, as in you can measure it in your frequency. If you were to take an impulse, which is how it changes over time, then you'd see it in that instead. The effects happen after you've got your initial impulse, that initial spike where you wanted that sound source to be in time.
All right. Well, that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of all that. So AJC said, hey, what is our opinion on doing averages of different positions and root to create a correction to be used? So let me first talk about.
Okay.
Elliot actually has a video about this, by the way.
Yeah. Not
which,
so much the measurements. I need to do one of those, but
but it directly relates to this question.
Yes, it does.
So what I want to say before we go to that, because you have a lot to say about that. I just did a review on the Dayton APA 1200 DSP, I think last month or something like that.
Yep.
That is a subwoofer amplifier. And the cool thing that I like about that, especially for a subwoofer, is it does measure 5 different locations and then it auto DSPs it over those 5 locations. So it doesn't do it for one. You can do it for one. You just leave the microphone in the same spot or move it close, whatever you want to do. But it can try to correct for the room in general. You're not going to get as flat of a response. I like it better because it does give you a better response over the room. And for me, that's more important is multi-seating in most rooms.
Can I go over my main method for taking measurements?
You know what? I would love that. And by the way, so this is taking measurements for DSP. So this is what he does. And then you're going to, and you have
correcting for a room, essentially.
And by the way, if you get a chance, put a link to that video in the chat so people can see it as well. But
sorry, before we go on, I've noticed AGC 9988, my friend over on toysdiyaudio.com, he has mentioned pre-ringing. Now, pre-ringing is a different matter. That's when you're using convolution type DSP. That's a different thing altogether. I've done many videos on that with linear phase filtering. Pre-ringing is essentially when you're making changes to your frequency response using EQ, you've got something called post-ringing, because those changes don't happen instantly. They happen a given amount of time afterwards. That's that minimum phase that I was talking about. You've got that phase shift. Now with linear phase, to make sure that doesn't happen, you've got the inverse of it before the initial impulse peak. Now, typically, if people are using really low computational power, like really low samples of FR filters, sorry, this won't make much sense at the moment if you haven't watched my videos, but you end up with a bit of a high noise floor in that region, and you end up with something with ringing, which is audible before that initial impulse. But if you've got high enough samples dedicated to your equalization, then that should be below the noise floor, should be inaudible. And in most cases it will, even if you don't have that, even if you have that high noise floor. If you're making really small adjustments in the EQ, even then you shouldn't have audible pre-ringing, really.
That's great. So let's talk about your measurement for multi-seat in a room.
Of course. So, excuse me. What I typically do is I take a moving mic method measurement, and what you do with that is you take you play pink noise through the generator in REW, and that pink noise would be sequenced so that every given amount of samples it restarts. And say, so typically they're in the range of 16K up to about 256K, I think you can go. And that basically says, okay, every given amount of seconds, it's going to repeat. And what you then do is you open up the analyzer and you set it to the sequence length that you're trying to record. And then as you play that noise and as you record it, you move the microphone around the listening position, typically in a figure of 8, going slowly so that you don't pick up wind noise. And you take a spatial average. Now, this gives an incredible average for the room. And as you'll see, as you keep going, you will end up seeing less and less and less change in the frequency response, because it's starting to pick up what is the average of the area that you're taking. Larger areas.
And that's happening software-wise.
Yes, it is inside of our EW. Larger areas that you're measuring across are going to give a better representation of the average response in lower and lower frequencies. When taking such measurements, you want to be at least 1 meter away from each wall, really, to avoid those boundary interactions with your walls, because they create quite a significant change in the bass response, especially. But then once you've done your moving microphone method and taken the save current reading from that, you'll find that it's got quite a high noise floor. So what you'll see is a lot of the sharp dips and sharp peaks and such, they'll be filled in, especially in extremely low frequency. The noise floor is typically quite high. So what I then do is I take about 5 to 10 single measurement sweeps across the area. And then what I do with those is of course, you need to make sure that they've got a...
When you say five or 10, you're talking about 5 or 10 different places.
Yeah, 5 to 10 different places within the listening area. Gotcha. Trying to spread those out as equally as possible. And then presuming you've got the actual impulse of it from using that time reference, the loopback, as was mentioned earlier, or the acoustic reference, you can then use a tool called vector average. And what that will do is it will actually not only average just the responses like RMS average or dB average would do, it would actually take the positional data from each of those impulses that you've got and take the phase of each of those things and compare them so that you end up with something that's representative of what can actually be corrected rather than what cannot be corrected. And
because there's going to be some areas in your room that are going to be sucked out.
Yeah, it's going to be all down to room modes, and it tries to ignore those. That's what that does, and that will give you it won't be as accurate to the averaged total power response in your room, because that's what the moving mic method will get at. But it will allow you to see where those sharper dips and such come in that you couldn't see with your moving microphone method.
And the best thing really to do at this point in time, is really watch Elliot's video, because it's a lot more in depth even than what we're talking about now.
I mean, this stuff.
He talks about the software that he uses as well, which is good. And by the way, Deviant, thank you so much for the $1.99 for Justin's medication. Also great content. Also, we'll have to make sure that he gets himself something off the dollar menu at McDonald's. No, we really do appreciate that. All right, so Philip mentioned something, and I think this is a really good question. I think a lot of people don't realize this. There are different types of filters in DSP. There's FIR filters and there's IIR filters, and he wants to know, what are the differences in those, and are steeper, if you're doing a steeper slope, is it better for FIR? Is it better for IIR? What just talk a little bit about FIR and IIR filters.
So before we go into that, so that it can help explain and answer that question a bit better, we didn't really go into any...
He said we're talking way over his head. What happens is just setting the EQ and letting it ride.
I'm sorry.
No, you know what?
I think we'll get to those more simpler things if you want still.
And the truth of the matter is that there are some DSP now, and there's a lot more that are coming with integrated auto DSP, and they are getting much better. When you were talking about setting up for multiple rooms, I was even thinking hey, we now have Odyssey that can do that, although I don't really like Odyssey that much. And we have all these other ones that you can use that some are good, some aren't. I was really impressed. And actually, before we go to the FIR, let me just. He said, "Hey, what do you think of the Dayton integrated amp with built-in DSP?" I'll just say first of all, I was surprised.
Okay,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask my first question. The amp with the built-in DSP. Yeah, sorry, I was going to say Dayton are doing a bunch of different DSP boards now, but essentially all of the current
I wonder which one
of that type use the same. Sorry.
Yeah, I think he is talking about the small board amplifiers.
Yeah, And I think
which uses 1701, right? Yeah, go ahead.
integrated. And I think they even use the same chip inside some of their actual plate amps as well. But essentially, most of these small board DSPs and such, they use the same chip, which is called an ADAU 1701. It's either made by Texas Instruments or no, it's not. It's Shure, isn't it? Yeah. So
sure.
Yeah.
Sure makes the actual board
Sure.
by I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. But anyway, you're not a big fan of the 1701 overall.
No, it's just it doesn't have much power, and particularly Mini DSP, the Mini DSP non-HD edition, that uses the ADAU 1701. And what I found, at least with Mini DSP's implementation, is when you try to correct anything below 200 hertz, it's not very accurate. It doesn't actually adjust how much you want it to adjust. So if you were to try and do a bit of a dip below 200 hertz or something, it wouldn't fully fill in that deep and that fully fill in that dip. And that's either, well, it's probably mostly because of the fact that it's a low power board and lower frequencies require more processing. But it also might be down to the fact of the way Mini DSP have implemented that, because there are ways that you can shove more of the processing power into those lower frequencies. But yeah.
So in general, you're not a fan of the 1701 chip.
No, it's just, I mean, it's
Problem.
good for what it is,
yeah.
but it's not. It's the least powerful, pretty much, that you can get in that kind of area.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think the problem is for a lot of people to find like integrated with DSP, there's just not many out there. And so that's probably the easiest one. And for me, this is the way I look at it, is for DIYers, it's probably one of the easiest one to get your hands on, one of the easiest ones to get started with. Dayton Audio has even made it easier because now you have their kind of like their templates or whatever you want to call it to get started loading up. And so I like them for that regards. I think they're very powerful using Sigma Studios, significantly more powerful than some of the other DSP programs, such as I've used a Relix program, which is super simple to use. It's a lot more powerful than people think, but it's not as powerful as Sigma Studios. Mini DSP, same thing. Very powerful, easy to use, not as powerful as Sigma Studios. Not saying anything bad. It just isn't. And so some of it goes back to.
Sure, Acrylic also use the ADAU 1701. Actually, a lot of these companies do, because it's easy to integrate, easy to set up, and good UI with those flow diagram blocks and such.
And once again, AJC is on point with this stuff. And I got to tell you guys, if you want to know more about DSP, you should definitely get on the forum and talk to these guys. They know significantly more than I will ever know about DSP. I'm not going to lie about that.
Particularly this guy here, AJC. Yeah.
Well, both of you. Oh, I lost that one. But let's get back to the FIR. So he said,
yes. I was going to. So we actually started to go into that a bit more. So I was going to mention we've also got the hardware side of DSP. So you've got those specific chips, the ADAU most commonly. And so the difference between FIR and IIR is, so first of all, what they actually stand for: finite impulse response, FIR; IIR, infinite impulse response. Infinite impulse response, it means that essentially.
And what's IRL?
In real life.
I was thinking International Racing League or whatever.
Oh, I've not heard of that.
Never mind. Forget it. All right.
Okay, sorry.
That was a terrible joke. All right.
All right. But yeah, so essentially IIR is a continuous filter. FIR, it's finite. It essentially takes samples from. That's what I was referring to as samples earlier. You've got a large number of samples can represent a lower frequency, lower and lower frequency in more and more detail. So the differences in themselves isn't too great, apart from what they're capable of. So and how they're implemented, but the difference is with IIR filters, you can only do minimum phase correction, so everything has that minimum phase as you change the gain values, as you add the crossover slopes and such. But with finite impulse responses, because they're finite and they loop back on themselves every so often, and they've got a given amount of samples, you can also describe the phase relationship as well as the gain relationship. And so what you're actually able to do is you're able to take the inverse of that minimum phase and apply it, and it becomes the linear phase. And that allows you to actually have that symmetrical impulse response that's commonly known with linear phase filters, whereas with IIR, everything would happen after that initial impulse response peak.
It's very interesting that you say it, because with an FIR, because you can change that phase relationship, you can also get a flatter response.
Yes, very much
and
so.
What I found
especially
interesting,
in a room.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. So Dayton Audio, I don't know, like a year or two ago, I don't. It was a little while ago. They came out with this little $60 auto DSP for your subwoofer unit, and I tested that thing out. And that thing, after it took some measurements, and I'm not going to say it's it only would do auto DSP with an iPhone. I'm not going to say it's like the greatest device. For $60, it's a really good device, though, I think. And that thing would literally apply like 150 to 200 FIR filters for one subwoofer in your room. And, I never did test. Someone asked me if I actually double checked the measurement with a microphone, and I didn't. But I mean, I could physically hear the difference, so I knew it was working. It's just a matter of, did it work as well as the actual graph on the...
That's probably a bunch of really high Q peaks. You see, instead of doing 100 or so filters, which can be easily automatically optimized like that, I'd combine them into things like high shelves and low shelves more easily. Just use less filters in the programming stage. But in the end, you end up with the same response, because it's actually the amount of samples that you're getting from it that describes how accurate the end result will be. But steeper slopes, that the answer for that, yes, personally, I'd only use steeper slopes in a linear phase relationship, because, as I said, as you go up in steepness, up in that number of order, up in that number of dB per octave, you're going to increase the maximum phase change when you're working with those minimum phase filters. You've got that 90 degrees of phase shift for every order of filter.
And this is one of those times where we need to talk or need to put a plug in and say, Philip Talbert, you need to go subscribe to Elliot Dyson, because he actually has a video on linear phase on basically what we're talking about right now. It's another great video. AJC makes a good point. Here's the deal. Sigma Studios just has a learning curve, and it does. The one thing that I do really appreciate about what Parts Express has done recently is because I would say that most people just give up in the beginning if they don't understand. And I understand. What they did is they put templates out there for you to download and have already for like a 2-way, a 3-way, a 2.1 that you can use with their boards. I guess, honestly, you could probably use it with any ADU, anyone that works with Sigma Studios. And then they also created a write-up so you can read up on it as well, like a big... And that to me was huge, because too many people are like, I don't know how to use Sigma Studios, and it's too good of a program not to use.
This guy right here, AJC, he's made an excellent handbook and even some sample schematics on the forum. So if you want to see those and use those, they're really great, really well optimized. Even a little bit of FIR for a tiny bit of phase correction in there as well. So
those people that
have a look at that.
Those people that are not on the forum are missing out. What is going on? And I'll tell you, they really are. I've been reading through that, and it literally is like a college course on it, and it's, and I mean that in a good way. Like, it's like, wow, like it's amazing. And I gotta give Philip some props, because he's asking like a lot of really good questions, and I appreciate that. 25 Hertz Life says, hey, is car audio DSP more advanced than home audio DSP?
It's certainly more expensive.
Yeah, I don't feel like I don't even know why it would be, but maybe you know something that I don't.
There are some certain proprietary auto EQ. For example, I'm pretty sure Kicker has one that apparently works really well. Yeah, where you put it over the headrest and it does some sweeps. I actually think that does some FIR stuff. So there are some real powerful DSPs, typically more powerful than in home audio, in car audio, but honestly, they do use the same chips that we can use in home audio. The same principles, some of the same principles apply in measurements and corrections as well. But really,
so there really shouldn't be a difference unless it's somehow an ease of use implementation, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Typically, they're just designed to be in boxes that are strapped into the carpet and running on 12 volts, really.
I was going to say, I actually have been impressed with, so for example, one of my favorite, which we haven't talked about, but I want to talk about one of my favorite things that you can do with an EQ, or DSP, I should say. In WinISD, you can actually check this out too. You need something with a strong motor, but WinISD will show you different things. Like if you want parametric EQ, do things. It's going to show you if you're going to have problems with cone excursion. It's a free program. We're never trying to sell you on anything, except if you want to download.
I'm always using free programs. Yeah. I don't like using non-free programs. So I just think it limits the user base, and those free programs out there I think are excellent because if people like them and they really appreciate them, then they'll donate to the creators of them. And I think it's a great system, the open source system. I think it's perfect.
I agree. And I would say one of the things that I really, really like is a Linkage Transform. So if you're not familiar with the Linkage Transform, the basic premise is it extends your bass response. Okay. I'm not going to explain how it does it. It does it problem is you have to have something with a strong motor. Okay, because if you don't have someone with a strong motor, you're going to go over your cone excursion like that. And you may not get like down to 20 hertz, but you can increase it. Now, there's a couple things, though, when you're thinking about Linkage Transform. One, most people, when they're going WinISD, they're trying to do a Linkage Transform that's completely anechoically flat. I would say don't do that because you're going to get bass boost anyway inside your room. So, it doesn't have to be anechoically flat, just something that protects your driver and allow your room to do what it's supposed to do.
Totally. And then what you do with that really is you look at your room response, look at that kind of the bass chain, the change in the bass region and your high frequency roll off, and you could correct those slopes. You don't try and alter those slopes because you're just going to mess with the power response really in that room, and it's going to be different for different positions and such. For example, if you have a look at the Harman room curve, great reference. Most people think that you have to match it directly, but no. If you actually read the paper that the curves are within, they'll actually describe that high frequency roll off. That's described by the directivity of your tweeter. That bass boost in the low region, that's going to be from the size of your room, how much room gain you've got in those low frequencies. But typically, it follows those curves or thereabouts. So it's a reference. It doesn't mean you have to follow it exactly. It means you should use it as a reference. That's what your response should be looking around. It doesn't mean that's what it should be exactly.
First question. We got a couple other questions that are going on here. I like Philip Delbert because I already subscribed to Elliot. I'm just throwing questions out there. And he's got another one that I want to get to, but Brian just got this one up and he hasn't asked a question yet. So I want to get him out there. He said, hey, does DSP play well with tube amps and preamps?
Yes, of course it does. So preamps, all they do is they amplify the voltage going into the amplifier. So it just allows you to get a bit more use out of your amplifier if you don't have the right input level. If your amplifier doesn't have enough gain, then it allows you to get up to that level and make full use of your amplifier. So preamps, they can change the sound signature, but they're not really meant to. But yeah, that's
Well,
the purpose of
a
that.
tube preamp is one of those, they do add distortion.
That's different. So the interesting thing about tube amps, the reason people like them is it's a different ratio between the second and third harmonic distortion. So it's not specifically that there's more distortion, it's because there's a different ratio between the second and third harmonics of the distortion. And that's what people typically like about them. That's from the research I've found, that's typically the case anyway. But all those do is they change the end result. If your DSP will do exactly what it needs to do, your tube amps and preamps will do just what they did without the DSP. They'll have the same effect.
All right, let's do this. Some people have been asking the same basic question, and the question is,
okay.
What are some of the alternatives to mini DSP? So besides mini DSP, what are some of the other DSPs that we can get? We'll go.
So the datum boards are, if you don't know what you're doing with Sigma Studio, they're equivalent to the non-HD version of Mini DSP. If you know what you're doing with Sigma Studio, they're kind of an in-between between the Mini DSP and the Mini DSP HD. The Mini DSP HD uses a Shark processor. It's about 500 megahertz, I believe, so slower than the kind of processor you'd find in your phone, laptop, or computer. But it's capable of a lot more than the ADAU 1701. And it can actually do some FIR filtering, I think up to 4096 samples, but that's still not really enough either, to be honest with you. Not if you want anything low frequency at all. You're going to end up with a bit of pre-ringing if you try and change low frequencies with that one, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's certainly a lot more capable. But the most capable of all, if you don't mind a bit of delay, is going to be your software equalization. And the thing is, there are solutions to add delay. So that's like
anyone that has a computer, for example, can download Equalizer APO. It's a free program. We actually have it. You create. It wasn't you that created the something on the forum, right? Was it you or AJC? One of you created a topic on the forum.
Yeah.
And then I linked to download it. It's free. You can do it. I do it all the time. I think also it's the same program that, you know what, I don't want to say it because I'm not sure. But if you're testing speakers, you want to know, hey, how will the speaker change if I EQ it a little? Great program to just download, make a quick adjustment, because you're typically already on your computer making some type of frequency response. You're trying to get that, so you can make that little adjustment and see what it sounds like and see if there's any difference. Huge fan of Equalizer APO. I've been using it for years. I know you've been using it for years too, right?
Yeah, totally. And I just want to say something that's pretty awesome. If you have a desktop computer that's relatively modern, even within the past 10 years, I'm pretty sure, you'll find that where you've in the back, where you've got the motherboard and all of the different connections on the back, you'll see that there's not just one analog out. There will be about 4 or 5 of them. And that's typically for outputs. And that's typically for actually desktop surround sound. But using Equalizer APO, you can actually repurpose them and create a 2-channel active.
Well, you could do a 3-channel because it's typically 6 channels. It's usually a 6 point. It's 5.1
or 7.1. Mine up there has 7.1.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm just saying, like even your older ones. Yeah. So you could do a 3-way active channels with it. Yeah. And believe it or not, Brian Zing, all he ever did was used. I don't know if he used Equalizer API, but he used software-based equalizer. So Philip asked this really good question, and SJC, he has a question I want to get to as well. So, hey, besides crossovers, EQ, and delay, what are some other applications of DSP? And I think that's a really good question because most people think of it as just EQ and delay, but there are other things you can do for it, right?
Yep. I mean, there are psychoacoustic effects that you can do with just 2 speakers, where you can widen the soundstage by adding a tiny bit of delay onto one speaker, I'm pretty sure, and different things like that. But what's really interesting is if you look at the pro audio industry, They actually use DSP to do something called beam steering, where you've got giant line arrays, each with individual drivers individually controlled. And what they can do is they can actually direct a column of sound in whatever direction they want. For instance, at the moment, I'm working on a design. It's actually called a pairwise Horback keel loudspeaker design, where essentially it's a tweeter, and then you've got a lower frequency driver above and below, and then a low frequency driver above and below. And by using distances between those centers of drivers and a specific slope linear phase filter, you can actually attenuate the high all of the response off axis. So if you were to move vertically off axis above or below, it will attenuate flat across the entire frequency range down. And with the specific separation between the drivers I chose, which is half wavelength at the critical frequency, is what it's called, is you actually end up with absolutely no lobing. So typically on designs where you've got drivers sharing the same frequency response, like in symmetrical speakers, what you typically have, like an MTM, for example, if you move vertically off axis, is you'd actually have a lobed response. So if you imagine this is your speaker here, imagine this line here, and the speaker is playing, or the speaker is playing in that direction. You've got, imagine this is like the shape of the response. You've got, sorry, I'm trying to draw in reverse here. You've got a lobe.
We know what it looks like.
Yeah, you've got a forward lobe. It's kind of like partially directive. It goes in the main direction. But then as you've also got these side lobes that come up and below. And that's just a response of the drivers interacting with each other and beaming, essentially. Well, creating comb filtering type effects. And with that design, you don't have that. And so you can do really neat stuff like that with DSP as well. So, yeah.
One of the things I really love too, which I mentioned it in my video, and I know Sigma Studios has it, and I'm sure there's other applications that have it too, but they have different things where you can boost bass when it's at low volume. And so the reason why that's really interesting is if you hear like those little small speakers that have that seem like they're much louder than it is, what you can do is you can set either a voltage or a limit, basically a limiter on it, where the bass will play louder and louder. And then as you're turning it up, the bass will start playing lower and lower until you turn up your speaker all the way, and the bass won't be playing as loud because to protect the driver. And it's one of the ways they trick people into thinking that this small speaker has so much more bass than it really does. Totally. And that, I think that's a really cool thing, because you can make those little speakers sound significantly bigger than what they really are.
I was actually having a look at how they do this about a month or so ago now. What they use in smart speakers are actually called, these things called smart amplifiers. They're actually relatively new. I think only the newest devices are properly integrating them. And they actually look at the amplifiers that actually read the feedback voltage from the driver and can tell what the driver is doing and whether it will overexert or like go over the exertion limit and distort or not, and limit based on those sorts of things as well as power targets. So it's really interesting stuff. Setting up a reference.
So can you talk about setting up a reference?
Okay.
And
I think a really good video on this on my REW thing, and I think you do too as well, Nick, with EQ as well.
No, I don't. You do.
Do you not? I thought you did.
I don't. I might. I don't know. I have so many videos up. I don't remember it though.
Okay. But yes, essentially, I always start by looking at the Harman room curve, and then comparing the slope of the high frequency to what I've got in room, because that will change depending on the directivity of your tweeter. For example, I'm using a BMR tweeter currently, and my off-axis slope is actually nothing. It's perfectly flat. So I use that. Instead of having a downward slope at the high frequencies, I don't. I have it completely flat, because that slope at the high frequencies in the Harman response is just meant to represent the natural directivity of your speaker and how that plays in affecting how that affects the response in your room. Yeah. And so you're just comparing your room's response to that and then trying to make it flat along that target, really. But yeah, I've got a good video on, I think it's one of my first videos on linear phase EQ. Yeah, and it goes through a bit of that.
And that's like really important too. And, you know, we were also talking about the other day, me and Elliot were both talking about too, because sometimes people want to set up for reference level as well. So how do we set up for reference level in the essence of...
Oh, reference level is in volume.
Well, I don't know, but I'm saying sometimes we talk about that. And me and Elliot were just having this conversation a couple days ago, I think
yesterday,
it was.
Even maybe.
Was it yesterday?
No, was it? No, it was 2 days ago. It was
well,
when you were on your trip. It was when you were on your way back from the trip.
If you haven't noticed, I came back from the beach. That's why I look so tan now. No, we but that if I took my headphones off, you'd know because they're red. My ears. But yeah, we talked about reference level because reference level really depends on the source that you're playing.
Especially source material. Yep.
And DSP in general, we can't fix it. So it's really interesting because a lot of people assume that when you for example, auto EQ a room with something like Odyssey,
or even going to the extreme and saying direct live, even something as special as that is still not going to be the right levels
across the board. So they just assume that like 0 is going to be reference. Well, 0 is not reference. In fact, even on different Blu-rays, the reference level will change. It'll depend. Like Walt Disney, for example, I know mixes theirs significantly lower than like say Warner Brothers or someone else. And and then we talked about even the difference from going from like your Blu-ray player to like Netflix, right? Even that.
Yep, totally. I mean, Netflix have a crazy dynamic range, actually, and that's why you often hear people complaining about not being able to hear the voices and then certain scenes being too loud and certain scenes being too quiet. And that's because of their integrated loudness level is minus 27 dBFS. So that's essentially what that means is 0 dB is full scale, 0 dBFS. That's like the maximum volume. Minus 27 dBFS is where the average volume level of their content is. So they've got a 27 dB swing from their average loudness to their peak loudness, essentially, which is insane.
It's like when you used to switch from your radio to like your CD player in your car, and then all of a sudden you get blown out by one of them.
Or in America, you've got those adverts that are extraordinarily loud. I've
Don't talk like America like you know it.
It's what I've heard from a podcast, that's all.
Well, you know what I heard about Britain? No, I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear. They don't like.
True? Do you get that?
What is it?
Where the adverts are really loud when you go off of
yes, they can be.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of TVs and stuff have implemented like volume leveling and things like that, which help. But yeah,
it's not ideal because they don't know what. So that volume leveling thing you mentioned there, that is actually a compensation. So if you turn the volume down, it boosts the bass, and naturally it boosts the highs, which it's not meant to. That's based off of an old research, but what it does is it boosts the bass and highs to try and make it sound like it does when you're watching a reference level. So it tries to make it have the same sound signature, but it's to do with hearing sensitivities. Human hearing sensitivity changes based on what playback level you've got.
And now that we're talking about DSP in general, here's the last thing that we need to mention. If you are watching TV on a TV with TV volume, you're doing it wrong. Here, if you have headphones, headphones are better than the TV. TV speakers are so many TV speakers now, they're shooting backwards because they don't want anything against it. So they're shooting against the wall. So all you're hearing is reflections. Half the time you're hearing.
Everyone's walls are going to be different as well. So it's not the greatest.
So bad. I mean, in our bedroom, we actually have one where we have to where it's just that, and I'm building speakers for it because I'm like, I cannot take this anymore. I can't. And it's the same thing. You can hear half the things. One of the things I do love is highly sensitive speakers. And we've talked about that. I mean, because when the dynamics are really bad, they should still hopefully be able to pick up pretty well, which is good.
Yeah, and the high sensitivity is actually really useful, especially for EQ, because it means that you can make a lot more drastic changes without losing too much overall gain. Because, of course, I mentioned you're making those dips. Everything is dips. Everything's cuts. So you're going to lose sensitivity. You just are. That's a matter of the fact. You're taking compromises. If you want better sound quality, you're going to have lower lower volume levels. It's just the way it is.
All right, so let me ask you the final question of the night that I think is going to be the final question of the night, at least.
Okay.
All right. You have a speaker.
Yep.
What would you rather have? Cost included, because there is cost included, right?
Mm-hmm.
A speaker with 3 different amplifiers running DSP to each one of those amplifiers, so 3 outputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming we'll just say a 3-way now, or a really good 3-way designed well with a passive crossover that you can later DSP.
The active setup. Do you know why? Because
no, that's why I asked the question.
Sorry. Okay, right. With the passive, you can't DSP each of the drivers separately, and so
you have to DSP the overall response.
Exactly, you're DSPing the overall response, and even if it's really well designed, you're still going to have those phase problems with the interactions between the drivers. You're not going to be able to do acoustic offsets the way you are because with an active setup. And even if they've taken that into account, your level of control is just going to be less. I mean, the ideal situation is you'd have you'd find a system that would allow you to do the active DSP on a budget. And in most cases, you actually can do that when you're doing something like software EQ or something.
I was going to say, you'd almost have
Chinese little amp boards and stuff. You can do that on a more of a budget than you can with passive components even.
However, you're cutting back on your amplifiers, right? Because now your amplifiers are probably going to be a little noisier. They're going to be, unless there's just not a lot of great budget. Well, there are, but it all depends.
There's a lot of things about.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think the major disadvantage of active DSP is the cost associated with it, because you do have to buy amplification for each one of the drivers, DSP for each one of the, and that's where it ends up getting expensive. And I do think one of the better like beginner, thing, like something like the DSP 408 is good because you can do 2 3-ways on a pretty decent budget. Or that the mini DSP is still 2x4, right? Do they have like a 4x8, or do they have anything like that?
They have an 8x8. I know they have an 8-channel one. I know that for sure. I've seen that recently.
8x8's like really expensive, isn't it? Like,
it's not an 8x8. 8x8's like $8,000, I think.
Okay. I'm gonna look it up. Well, they have a 4x10.
4x10, so that would be 4 inputs, 10 outputs.
That might be the one I was thinking of. That was like,
I think that might be the one I was thinking of too.
Yeah, no, they don't. A 10x10 and a 4x10 is, and then a 2x4 and a 4x4. Because I believe the 4x10 is one that you can actually put Direct Live on as well.
Yeah, I think any of the HD ones you can put Direct Live on them because they've got those sharp processors. They have that small capability for a bit of FIR, which Direct Live actually uses. Direct Live uses a combination of linear phase and minimum phase filters, I believe. They don't use fully linear phase because they don't have the processing power for it, but they do use a combination.
I think this is a great point.
Yeah, unless your amp doesn't have turn-on bumps.
Well, even if it doesn't, if your DSP should ever falter, you still want to have a cap on there just in case.
If your tweeters are sensitive, then yes.
Yeah, especially if you're running something like a planar or something like that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, you need one on there.
You will want those caps. But the thing is, if you're using a single capacitor on, or even a more complicated high pass on that single drive and then actively crossing over it, you can actually compensate for that minimum phase response just by applying phase correction by itself rather than a linear phase filter. Think inside of Rephase, which is the program I use to generate these. There is a little tab which is just for correction by itself, which you can use to correct for minimum phase crossovers in the form of typical passive crossovers that are implemented, like different Linkwitz, Rileys, Bessel, Butterworth.
So besides the DSP 408, is there any other one that you can think of that's budget friendly or something that has at least 6 outputs? Let's put it that way, 6 outputs.
Not that's currently available. I mean,
I know that's
I'm not the best person
right?
to answer this because I just work with software because I don't care about delay, and so it's just the best solution for me because it's ridiculously cheap and especially with home audio in the UK. No, definitely less than in the US.
Home audio is less, really.
Yeah.
So what is you like?
I don't think I know anyone in the UK, like personally, that cares about home audio setups or anything. Most are running off their TVs and stuff.
Elliot, you have a new mission in
Why
life.
Do you think I started this channel?
That's
one reason.
I now know why.
From reason.
I now know why. All right. So
it's people just aren't aware of it. It's over in USA, you seem to have a lot of community-based stuff where, especially because you've got it in car audio a lot more, it seems to have translated over into home audio a bit as well. So
I would tell people too, like as soon as you've heard a good sound system,
you can't go back.
No,
people have no reference. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess if you don't have a reference, then you're just like, hey, listen to my awesome TV, and it's like, okay.
Especially because when most cinemas over here aren't the greatest sound quality themselves, so even that's not a great reference. So
I know. I actually had someone respond on there. I've never even heard a good theater in my. I'm like, really?
Me neither.
Like, I just watched what was that movie? The new Top Gun Maverick, and we did it in. We have a theater out here called Malco, and they have their new MXT theater. And it's amazing. It has Dolby Atmos. I think it has like 60 or 70 speakers in there. It's like amazing and really good sound too. It's not like 60 or 70 terrible speakers. They put a lot of money into it. And that movie was just amazing. The sound sounded great and completely awesome. And yeah, it is Deviant for Life's right. It is time for us to go. He's like, get out of here, guys.
One quick thing. My first and only IMAX experience, the back right speaker had blown.
Oh,
it was crackling.
Dude, you know what? This is a good point. I want to make this point before we leave. Well, you knew.
I knew, and then I pointed it out to my family next to me, and they were like, "Oh, you've ruined the film for us now. We didn't notice."
Oh my god, how can they not notice that?
Well, once I pointed it out, they did. That's what ruined it.
So, true story. This is a true story. I went and saw in a theater. I went and saw the movie Pacific Rim. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yep, great film.
Fantastic. I hated it in the theater.
Did you? Oh,
you know why? The subwoofers were not working.
Yeah,
and you could hear. Oh, well, one was kind of working, and it was like, and it was blown. And so I told them afterwards, "Hey, your sub is blown." So I was like, "I'm gonna."
Do they?
I don't know if they cared or not, but I didn't want to watch it again. But then I watched it on. I bought it again because I think they had it in 3D. So I bought it like in 3D. It's supposed to be good in 3D. Why not? Yeah. Watched it with my subwoofer, with my sound, blown away. I was like, this movie is awesome.
Yep.
And there are a lot of movies like that I could see like people like, I don't really like it. And then if you watch it on like a great sound system, you're like, I get it now. Interstellar is another movie. Interstellar, if you watch on a great sound system, that music score that they did in there.
Yeah. Sci-fi movies are some of the best for those kind of tests and experiences, really.
I agree. I think like if people watch a movie, a good movie, like, and I want like people to watch like those movies that they hate, like that are action movies, and then all of a sudden watch it on a good surround sound, or like not like, and then watch it and then be like, I like this movie now. All right,
Yeah.
now
it
buy
completely
yourself.
changes the experience of those kind of films. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll
Thank
leave
you,
on
Charlie.
that. Yes. Another.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you guys. We really appreciate it. Thanks guys for everything. Thank you, Robert Cook, as well, for saying goodbye. Best show for sure. 25 Hertz to Life. We won't tell Justin that. And all right, guys, have a great night. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.